Hi, everyone. Welcome all of you once again to our series of expert interviews called Financially Speaking with established individuals in finance who've broken myths about the complications and have carved their own unique, distinct journeys, making finance work for them. Today, I'm delighted and honored to have with us Ms. Khadija Khateet. Khadija is the managing director at IFS Advisory. She has also held the CEO role at Watan Investment and Securities Company, a leading investment bank in Saudi Arabia, and has closed landmark M&A and ECM transactions between 2011 and 14. Prior to that, Khadija has also worked for National Investor, a leading regional investment bank in the Middle East. The main areas that she's passionate about include fintech, edtech, health tech, prop tech, and e-commerce. Khadija is also a Fulbright scholar. She's received her MBA from Oklahoma State University and her Master of Science in Finance from Boston College. Khadija believes if software is eating the world in the eyes of Anderson Horowitz, in her eyes, financial technology is defining where money, power, democracy, and individual freedoms will be tomorrow. She's also a member of Investopedia's Financial Review Board and has 25 plus years of strategy and investment experience. Khadija, what a pleasure it is to have you with us. I could go on and on, but we'd like to hear from you. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How has it been? How did you get into finance and what keeps you going?
Thank you, Neha. Thank you very much. I was also having high anticipation for this interview and with you intellectually on social media and directly afterwards. So it's amazing how technology connects like-minded people. And technology has been a great gift to me. I leverage it in the best way I like to, and I expanded my horizons. So I will start by thanking the program for inviting me. And I will not expand too long on my journey because I will sound old. I'm not, it's just my 24 hours are expanded or multiplied, or also life makes that connections and networks amplify your abilities, and you can do things in 5 years yet that you may do in 10 years. And there are people that can speak about that much, much more than I am. So I'm just one of the millions, okay? And our goal is that there are more millions that will do that like this, be an enabler and a role model for youth and for other people to get hints and tips so they can do more of their skills and abilities. Okay, so let's talk about finance. My career, in fact, started with business in general. I was in the field of oil, working with Shell Oil as the first field manager in Morocco, the first woman. I worked in gas stations, airports, and ports, and I have this drive of doing some, be excellent in whatever I do. So I shined in there, promoted many times. After that, the Fulbright Scholarship. After that, my MBA. After that, work with American Airlines for sourcing engines. After that, working in the power sector, wind and energy, which is a big topic right now, but I did it in 2001. To 2003, then back to the US, and then dive deep down into finance and capital markets. Went for my master's in finance, did the Chartered Financial Analyst accreditation, worked with UBS in wealth management and investment banking, and then expat in Saudi Arabia in investment banking. Then I started to pay attention to networking, like friendship at work, partnership, and then entrepreneurship, you know? So I found that whatever skills I built, it needs people to empower that and to make it real and to bring something amazing out of it. So I met a lot of good friends and partners at work, became the a CEO of a bank, first CEO actually in Saudi, as you mentioned. And had a lot of pleasure working high-profile transactions as a woman. And then back to Boston, and then started my own company in corporate finance, did M&A. Then at some inflection point, I felt like finance just by itself is obsolete. It needs technology. to be revamped and re-energized and to be useful again, because just with that it's useful, but not too much, because you don't speak the language of technology. Then started to read a lot of case studies, follow the action and Rising Star, Stripe, Adyen, Ant Financial, Plaid, MasterCard, Goldman Sachs, all the changes that's happening in finance, but enabled with technology. I had so much fun, and I felt like my career has started again. You know, it's just so energizing to find something in you that will demand from you to learn every day. So I'm sitting like a student again and learning. Then I started teaching fintech, because it's an area where demand is, and there is a lot of transformation and recycling of skills of finance into fintech. So it's a great way to augment the skills of finance people into fintech and like enable them to remain relevant. So I started with Brandeis teaching in Masters of Digital Innovation in Fintech. I enjoyed that so much. I developed a course about launching ventures in fintech. And just so much fun. And I got a lot of entrepreneurs with real business plans. I worked with my students, stayed friends with my students, closed groups. After that, worked with the fintech school in California, teaching fintech. And then through the fintech school, I got introduced to Cornell, and I teach women entrepreneurship and finance right now with large groups of women. Now we started with 20,000 women, now it's 50,000 women. And yesterday I had the pleasure of having a large discussion with them between 8 p.m. and 9:15, because we just go over, and there were like 20 ladies with me in the room, and I call it the meeting of the minds. And we talk entrepreneurship wide and large and deep and whatever. Also, we talk personal, because women need an ecosystem, and need an ecosystem that understands them. Okay, so I also advise fintech startups, and my type of work is that I partner really tightly with my clients, to the point I own their startup as much as they own it, and they know that. Through that knowledge, most of them invite me to become part of it. That's how I get connected to Khurram Aghaz. From Aghaz Investments. That's the core of our discussion today. And Khurram is established software engineer for over like 20 years between Microsoft and Oracle. Then he thought about this idea of Halal robo-advisor. He started working on it. He's very resourceful, very skilled. Then he says, Khadija, do you want to come and be part of this team? And my motto right now, after a long journey, I only join teams that I believe they are doing something impactful, because I just want to be part of something that's meaningful to me, either a service to humanity in fintech, like financial inclusion, like something transformational in some subsegment of fintech, or halal investing, because I am a Muslim and I would like to be part of that and enable finance ethically in line with the faith of Muslims around the world, which has not been the case for so long. Okay, so that's my connection with Aghaz. I worked with Aghaz since as an advisor from April. We launched a couple of weeks ago, so we are excited. Our app is live, and we are doing a lot of things. Yes, and I'm not the managing director. I am the investment person at Aghaz. Khurram is the CEO, but for us, of course, in any startup, there's no role. It's all generalist. Anybody can contribute anything. We just need the mind, the heart, and the brain of people to help us do whatever they can do. You know, it's just a very flexible and fluid environment. Anyone can do anything as long as it's working for us. Okay, so that is Aghaz. And my relationship with them.
That is wonderful. I think that is one thing that fascinates me about finance, is that you never stop learning. So you learn and you sort of, reinvent, and then newer technology comes in, so you're learning. So that's fascinating. So we do a lot of work around financial literacy, and we don't really talk about financial literacy as something where you open a bank account and you're done and dusted. So what we want to, is we aspire is that, newer avenues of finance should be highlighted, which is where we stumbled upon Islamic finance. And you wouldn't believe, a very good friend of mine, my closest friend, she's based out of Dubai now, and she's a Muslim. And I reached out to her and she said, I don't really know much about it. And that's when the thought hit me that, we have to tell people who have the money to invest about these kind of alternate avenues. So could you please tell us about what is Islamic finance? What are some of those core fundamentals, halal-based investing, Sharia laws? Just throw some light about what the beautiful world of Islamic finance is.
Okay, thank you, Neha. First of all, I would like to make a disclaimer that I'm not a Sharia advisor. I am just a financial professional operating in the space of Islamic finance. And as you know, any venture needs a lot of minds, and each mind is specialized or expert in one area. So in Agaz, we have the two Sharia advisors. We have the investment team, we have the technology team, we have the quantum computing team, and etc. So, and each one of us brings something to the table. For Islamic finance, the main guidelines is that riba is haram. Riba is the interest that is made over an amount of money. Either I put my money in the bank and they receive interest on it, that's haram, I can't receive it. It's also haram that I take a loan from the bank and pay them riba interest. So either in or out, interest on money over money, that's riba, because Islam wanted to keep the connection between the money as the representation of value and the value itself, which is the underlying asset behind the value, like for mortgage, the house, and the money for the house. So that needs to be tightly connected, stay tightly connected. And you are an expert in finance, you would know what happened when those disconnected mortgage-backed securities happened, toxic trenches happened, and the global financial crisis happened. It's just its extreme usage of derivatives, and that make that the trenches of derivatives are far away remote from the house itself that they represent, and that's the disconnect. In Islam, in fact, that enlightened me. I was thinking, because I was studying finance, and there's that, and I said, wow, there's that principle in finance and in Islam that says you should not disconnect riba, and riba also represent any exchange between you and me. For example, you give me something that's worth $10 and I give you something that's worth $1, that's riba, because I am using you. I'm not giving you the fair exchange against the value that you gave me. Any unequal exchange of value means that one party is penalized in that exchange. That's considered riba. From fairness point of view, okay? There is another principle, it's called qimar, which is gambling. Like gambling is speculating too much with money or with anything that you own. Assets is not allowed in Islam, because that's, taking too much risk and being, not unhinged about your assets, and your assets belong to your family members and all that. It's just about financial wellness of people. That's qimar. There is also gharar. There is gharar. Gharar means I'm selling you something, but that something is not really real. Like I'm selling you a fish that's still swimming in the sea. That I can't do that, because that's really very far-fetched, like a value, but it's far remote, and it's not certain that I will be able to deliver that to you. That's I would make a parallel, make derivatives would be something like that, about some type of promise of something that may happen, or 50-50 will happen or not happen. Yeah, so that's gharar. So it's not allowed to sell something that you don't have the certainty that you own it and you are able to sell it. Okay, so those are like the main thing that I know, but yes. I'm sure if a Sharia advisor, he will tell you much more.
But I think that's very, very important for people to know, because the way I see it is that Islamic finance is a way of socially responsible, finance. So in that sense, it's also important from a sustainable finance perspective, because, people who have the wealth in turn, if you can take care of others who don't really have, and that sort of helps bridge the inequality gap at some point. So what are your thoughts as Islamic finance possibly being a way to sort of lead into sustainable finance as well?
Yes, thank you so much for asking this question, because it is at the core of what we're doing at Aghaz. We see a deep connection between Islamic finance and values-based finance, or money for good. Okay, so you touched on charity and contributions to society from the wealthy to the not wealthy, which is a redistribution of wealth and of money. There is a big pillar in Islam about zakat. So when a person makes some money, at the end of the year, they have to do calculations and count 2.5% of their money and give it to the eligible, which is the needy family members, starting with family members and going like neighbors, and then by relationships. So that is a way for the person deliberately, with his control. We talk about customer empowerment. That's customer empowerment. So it's your own money. There's no government to come ask you for it and redistribute it. You distribute it yourself by your own feeling of obligation that God is watching you. And there is that part of 2.5% that doesn't belong to you in that money. You need to give it, and to give it to the eligible. So that's empowerment. It's you do it. So it's a DIY, do it yourself. And then so Muslims, in addition to taxes that they pay to the government, they are also obligated to pay that zakat 2.5%. Hopefully it's good enough to redistribute. We are also asked to do a lot of sadaqah, which is a charity, to give, like outside that 2.5%. The more you give, the better. And also it's in line with your earnings and your assets. If you own 100, give out of it 1. If you own 1 million, give out of it 1,000, or alike. So it's not about how much, it's about how much does that represent in what you have. And that's inner, it's a personal decision. Nobody will discuss with you. You own what you know, what you own. Make sure you give some of it out. Okay, and so I would like also to go to how how Islamic banking or Islamic fintech intersect with ESG, environment, social, and governance, which is a large topic and now globally adopted. And I'm always so happy to follow the trends. And now the situation is that $1 out of $3 in the world is dedicated to ESG by the will of the investors. Investors say, I would like this dollar to be in ESG. The others, or there are 30% in the world, or 1/3, that would like to invest only in ESG. So it's a big drive led by the investors themselves. And now the investors are influencing the change of money managers and asset managers, so that they do research and go into the assets and look at securities and funds and have standards and definitions, so that they can invest those assets specifically to the ESG. So it's a large topic. Also, the ESG and sustainability impact is making a lot of companies make very meaningful decisions in terms of planet protection, in terms of carbon neutrality. Just yesterday, I heard about FedEx now committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2040. Just 2 days ago, Volvo will be 100% electric. Last month, Daimler and Mercedes. And it's just so wonderful to see all these companies working hard. It's not easy to be environmentally friendly, but now they put their mind into it, and I'm sure they're going to do it.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. Incidentally, the talk that's going to come just before this is absolutely focused on sustainable finance. And this is more from an Indian standpoint also, because the problem is there's really no such set standards in India. So we were taking cues from, like, global standards and trying to figure out, is there a way to define a framework? And also from this carbon neutral perspective, it's also important that it's not just, some credit that companies are taking to sort of show on the books, but actually a lot of meaningful work translates. So that is something, but the good thing is that people are now thinking about it. So I was just telling it, we have to start talking about it now, especially from an emerging economy perspective, because otherwise we're going to come and go, and then the earth is not going to be the same. So from an Islamic finance perspective also, 2.5% is absolutely what we go and spend such, so I mean the same amount of money over things we may not even need. So that is so fundamental, but I think people need to know about it. And that is the reason why we said, let's talk about it, because even the educated Muslims need to be aware, because it's just a way of life. It's just this change in mindset. What we feel is that financial literacy is also about a little bit of a change in mindset. So in your wonderful journey, have you noticed some of the key challenges around financial illiteracy? And how that sort of translates, and how are you doing the work with Agas to sort of address that gap area in financial literacy?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, you just touch on the things that really resonate with me and deep in my heart. Part of my role in teaching is to spread financial literacy. Also, part of entrepreneurship is that a lot of bright entrepreneurs are not so savvy in finance. And also in general, when you see people in consumption and when you talk with friends and family, most of the challenges come from that relationship that's not healthy with money, but because it's not about the amount of it, it's about the behavior with it and how you perceive it. And at Agas, in fact, we always debate, and as you debate, things crystallize and become more shaped and clearly. It's like wonderful when you exchange with people some ideas that are deep inside your brain come to life better in terms of words. So one statement that we say at Agas is that money is great so long as it serves in line with your faith, in line with your values, serves your dearest objectives in life, and enable you to live a decent life, productive life, generous life, and contribute to causes and healthy life. So that also time management is part of it. So you don't want to take so much work that you don't have any time for yourself. You don't want to have money to consume. Like, it's just a whole balance among all these dimensions of life. And the money is an enabler. And it has to be set right. It's a mindset, like you said. It's a mindset, and no discussion of money has to be done isolated from lifestyle, values, family circumstances, personal circumstances. What do you want to do? What you care about? Because that money is just a servant of those discussions.
Thank you so much. That is so powerful, and we've also noticed that after a point, money plateaus. So it really doesn't have, but it's just about that shift in, adopting behavior. It could be little things. So that is something which is so important. Thank you, Khadija, for sharing all this amazing journey. I wanted to ask you, what are some of your favorite books, or, anything, any resources that you sort of go back to as an educator, as somebody who is enabling so many women entrepreneurs, which is so important, and tell them, and something like, we all have our good days and bad days, but what are some of those things that continue to inspire you when you have those bad days, and say, hey, I'm going to come back, learn something new, and then spread it all around?
Okay, so for me personally, I follow the people that I respect and I found powerful in their entrepreneurial journey, or in any other sector, activism, or so those people that I look at and say, wow, how is he or is she doing that? Then I start following them now with social media. If they're alive, if they're not alive, then you read their biographies. But if they're alive, you can read their biographies, but also you can follow them daily on their journey and what they're doing and how they're doing it. So some of the people I like a lot is Elon Musk. I look at him and I see the level of productivity of, maybe he's atypical, but it just inspires me that I can do so many projects. In fact, that's why I'm associated with so many startups, and it's working. It's working as long as you have in your mind that, yes, I can be enabling this and this and this, and I can think this dimension, but I can also think that. And by the sheer, in fact, there is one tip that I want to share here. When you're involved in many spaces, your brain become multiplied, because you bring your teachings or learnings from this space, you can repurpose it to the other space. And you become like augmented, because we don't have just one area in where our brain is very versatile and can do a lot of things. And that diverse learning enables you to become a diverse manager or a diverse entrepreneur, and you can do it. You just need, as we say, time management, focus, dedication, energize. You have to be inspired by people. When you see someone is doing much better, when I look at these people, I just say, I'm not doing enough. I have to do a little bit more tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow I'll be, and I always keep that optimism. It just propels me and gives me that positive energy that it's doable. I just need to figure out how to do it.
So thank you so much for mentioning that. Of course, Elon Musk is an admiration for all of us. And, let's hope that we can make even 1% of the impact that he's making. So thank you. But despite that,
some of the discussions I had with entrepreneurs, that, dilution of the entrepreneur. And then I say, Elon Musk just made a hole in that dilution. There is no dilution. Just keep doing it, It's like, you're doing too many things. Maybe not. You just need to, have the right things in your mind. And it's only you that defines what you're doing. The world does not know what's going on in your head. You define the limit where you can go and focus and just do the best you can in that limit and that framework that you draw for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just so sort of pushed to say this is like, asset allocation, just sort of spread your energies.
Exactly.
Bifurcate it. But yes, thank you so much, Khadija.
Portfolio. You have your portfolio of your projects. One of them is family and your own personal time, and the rest is project 1, 2, 3, and you juggle it. You drop project 1 and then you take project 2. Then, each circumstance commands that you give priority to something over another.
Yes, absolutely.
Women, when I talk with women entrepreneurs, I always say, if personal life hits, take care of personal, then get back to the game. It's always just be flexible and malleable like water.
But thank you, Khadija, for the amazing work that you're doing with Agaz, your own advisory company, and all these women entrepreneurs and, fintech, edtech. The impact that you're trying to create is, I think, sometimes goes a little bit less noticed, but it is so powerful. So thank you for all that brilliant work that you're doing in enabling financial literacy from your perspective. And what an honor it has been to have an opportunity to connect with you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for talking to us. And I'm sure this is one of many, many, many more. I would say, we're going to come back. We're going to sort of come and work on something together, and many more collaborations in the future.
Thank you so much, Neha. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for sharing with your audience. And it's always an honor and a pleasure to talk with you and to talk to your audience. And I hope that we shared something useful today.